Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this, your last class of the Maccabees. I know everyone is excited to be done with this topic, to be listening to me just lecturing and not really knowing what's going on because I talked about a whole lot of information that we're not familiar with. But I've had a good time. I wasn't here last week. So Stephen very graciously stepped in and he discussed some more of his thoughts on Philippians, right? Philippians chapter 2. And so I think that was beneficial for everyone. But now I'm back, and I know it'll take a little bit to kind of jog our memory from where we left off a couple weeks ago. And apologies to the folks online. They didn't even get to see that class. We forgot to record that class. So it's been about 3 weeks for them. So for those online viewers, we went over 1 Maccabees chapter 13 through 15. And where we left off, we only had one chapter left. So we've only got one chapter of new material to talk about tonight. So what I thought that I would do is, in lieu of trying to recap and catch everybody up on where we are, I'd just try to make this just a single shot kind of a recap of the whole quarter and talk about everything that we've done through the Maccabees up to this point. And just kind of, if you want something more in depth, you can watch the 7 or 8 other videos that we've talked about, and by all means just read the text yourself and get into some commentaries. I absolutely encourage you to do that. But maybe for tonight, we'll just skip some stuff out of necessity just to make it a bit more succinct. And then this can be just a one-time reference video and try to talk about the Maccabees and the whole story of the Maccabees in 30 minutes or less. So that's what I intend to do tonight. We'll see how far that goes. So when we started talking, the first thing that we talked about was the Inter-Testamental Period, right? So we talked about how there's about 400 years between the last book of the Old Testament being written and the first book of the New Testament being written, and how during that 400 years, a lot of things happen. And if you're just a casual reader of the Bible and not familiar with the things that are going on, it's kind of a little bit jarring. When we leave off the Old Testament, we have the Persians are in charge, and when we pick up in the New Testament, the Romans are in charge. And the Persians are kind of hands off. They're much more willing to let Ezra and Nehemiah go back to reclaim the temple, rebuild the temple, and there, we have the things that happen in those stories, and then we flip to the Romans, and the Romans are not that way. They are very involved in everything that's going on in the regular lives of the citizens in Judea. And then you have the one other kind of major thing that happens is the advent of the Pharisees. Where did this political group come from? How did they arise, and what are they stand for? What are their thoughts? So Jesus is very critical of them, and it serves to us better to know kind of a little bit about them in order for us to study the word, to understand the words of Jesus better. So during this intertestamental time, it's not just there was a vacuum. There were no prophets, but there were writings, right? And so some of these writings were useful enough for people to kind of learn about this time that whenever the Old Testament got translated from Hebrew into Greek, which was the common language of the era after Alexander the Great comes through, and he kind of makes everybody, unifies everybody with the Greek language. And so some of these other writings get translated along with the Old Testament scriptures into the Greek. And so these collection of writings that we have is called the Apocrypha. And it's very confusing that they did that. A lot of people wind up conflating the Apocrypha with the Old Testament and merged the two and said, well, they're all scripture. And Protestants kind of reject that notion. And by the time Martin Luther comes around and we kind of have this whole idea of where we're examining everything from Catholicism, this is one of the things that they question. And they say, this wasn't part of the original Hebrew Bible. Why would it be part of our Old Testament? But that is not to say that even though we reject it as scripture, it's still beneficial for us to study, right? There's still a lot of good things in there for us to learn about. And there's a lot of writings, meaning like poetries and wisdom literature, and a few prophets as well. But the only history that's in there is the Maccabees. And so that's kind of as one of the more beneficial things for us to study, so that, in the same way that we have Samuel, we have Chronicles, we have these characters and the deeds that they've done, and kind of the story of God's people, that's written down for us to examine. Now, again, not scriptural, but still useful for us to look at. So as the text opens up, we get introduced to these people, like I mentioned. The Jewish people that we get introduced to they're inextricably linked with the political happenings of the day. So that's why throughout this kind of study, we've been mostly looking at two charts. We've got this chart of the Seleucid kings that I have up on the display right now, and then we also have the chart of the Hasmonean family. So you have the Jewish leaders, and you have the Gentile leaders, and the two kind of go hand in hand through this story. So we open up with the introduction of Antiochus IV, which is kind of weird. Antiochus III is the top one on the list there. I know it's kind of small to read back there. Sorry. Next time we'll have our class up front, and then everybody can read. But Antiochus III was very influential. But he has two sons, Seleucus IV and Antiochus IV, and Antiochus IV is the one that we open with as being the king of Seleucia. Now, he is the remnant king from Alexander the Great. We just mentioned him coming through, conquering everybody, and whenever Alexander the Great died, his kingdom got kind of divided up among the regions. The Seleucid regions passed down through several people until it came to Antiochus IV. So he sees a bunch of infighting among the Jews, Antiochus does, and especially as he's going through, he will find on his way to Egypt, he's heading up a raid, and on his way down through, on his way from Seleucia to Egypt, that is where Judea is, and so he sees all the turmoil in the region, and he thinks that this may all lead to a revolt if it's not already there. So on his way back up from Egypt back to Seleucia, he sacks Jerusalem. He takes everything that's in the temple. He sacrifices a pig on the altar and defiles everything. And he makes Judaism illegal, punishable by death. And so we get a lot of stories of people being tortured or martyred in response to this. But again, there's some people that are the Jews who don't see this as an issue, and they're happy to be Hellenized. Now, among those, so there's, that infighting still remains. But this is a very bleak time in the story of God's people. It is hard for people to practice things like circumcision and observance of the Sabbath, these very external, visible signs that you are a Jew, whenever somebody who sees those signs is going to reprimand you for it, and in very cruel ways. So in chapter 2, we're introduced to a priest whose name is Mattathias. and Mattathias kills an officer for trying to enforce the king's rule. And in doing so, he has started a revolt. So we're introduced to his 5 sons who are going to fight along with him. And they're going to gather allies and just generally act as the centerpiece of this whole revolt. It's going to revolve around this family. And we refer to them as the Hasmonean family. So if you ever want to look this up and you see the Hasmonean Dynasty, the Hasmonean Revolt, the Maccabean Revolt, those are all used pretty interchangeably. And when Mattathias dies of old age, he leaves his son Judas in charge. So flip this back. There's Judas right in the middle. So we've got John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan are the sons of Mattathias. So he leaves Judas in charge. And Judas is a great military leader. The text simply cannot talk him up enough, really. The whole book of the second Maccabees is just telling his story. It's just the story of Judas, and it's much more in-depth than kind of the broad brush strokes that first Maccabees uses. First Maccabees goes over a longer period of time. Second Maccabees zooms in on Judas's campaigns. And at first he's using a lot of like kind of hit-and-run guerrilla warfare tactics, kind of the same thing that his father would employ. But eventually he gains enough strength, and he is able to meet Antiochus IV's troops head-on. And he is able to do this. He defeats several generals and generally just makes a name for himself. He defeats Gorgias, Nicanor, Lysias, and in that last one with the defeat of Lysias, he is able to take back the temple. And so that is where we have the dedication, the rededication and purification of the temple, and that is where we have the Festival of Hanukkah comes from. That is from Judas reclaiming the temple and rededicating it. And in the same vein, he's making a statement to the people, to the leaders, the Gentile leaders, and then the nations around him, saying, we are a force to be reckoned with, and this is really kind of the beginnings of an independent state. Now, they're not exactly independent, because the Seleucids still own a bunch of fortresses in the area, and specifically, they have a citadel in Jerusalem that is just going to be a permanent fixture that's going to be able to be used or influence things in Jerusalem for the Seleucids' advantage. Now, there's a lot of political transitions that occur, so I'm going to flip this back to the Seleucid kings. So Antiochus IV, the next year Lysias, who had just been defeated, we got the temple back. Lysias comes back, and he's on a vengeance, and he in the battle that ensues, Eleazar dies, and he's about to defeat Judas. And just as he's about to defeat Judas, Antiochus IV dies. Now, Lysias is his general. He's the regent for Antiochus V, but when Antiochus died, he did not leave the regency to Lysias. He left it to a guy named Philip, so Lysias had to go back and clean that up, and so he was able, the Jews were able to avoid disaster in that moment. And Lysias does battle Philip. He wins, but it doesn't matter because as soon as that happens, Demetrius I shows up. Now, Demetrius I was supposed to be the next in line after Antiochus IV died, but Rome never installed him. And so they instead thought that it would be easier to keep tabs on, the child king of Antiochus V. But Demetrius escapes Rome, and he makes it to the land of the ancient Near East. He kills Antiochus V and Lysias, and he names himself king. Now, Judas does not curry favor with the new king because remember that Jewish infighting that we were talking about. There's a guy named Alchemist who is the high priest or in competition to be the high priest, and he warns Demetrius that this Judas guy is just a warmongerer. And so Alchemist kind of sides with Demetrius the First, and Demetrius sends a couple of people into the region to be the governor and to kind of dethrone Judas, as it were. So Nicanor is the one that he sends. First he sends Bacchides. Bacchides makes inroads into the region, and then he sends Nicanor to be the governor. But Nicanor doesn't kill Judas, and whenever the king learns about that, he gets really upset. So Nicanor starts looking for Judas to kill him, and thinking that Judas is hiding in the temple, he goes there and he threatens the temple and the priests, and he says that you will show me where Judas is, and or I'll destroy all of you. And they say that's a bad idea. Of course, there's nothing they can do about it at the time, but then whenever the time comes for Nicanor and Judas to finally have their battle, Judas is able to defeat him. And he cuts off his head and his arm and his tongue, and they hang it from the citadel as a warning for those people, and they have a huge celebration. They name it as a Festival of Nicanor Day, and that is where Second Maccabees ends. That's where that book comes to a close. That is the closing the chapter on Judas's exploits there. So.
You're talking about the citadel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same type. I don't remember which football team that got the citadel.
Oh, yeah.
Is there any correlation, or is it just?
I don't know. I don't know if it's that specific citadel that they're referencing. I tend to think not. That's just the name of the university, is the Citadel. It's in North Carolina, Virginia? It's on the East Coast. South Carolina. I'm sorry. I don't know. So, well, Demetrius sent Bacchides. You can't have this, you just made a big spectacle out of the guy that I had sent to be the governor, so he sends Bacchides back, the guy who had originally made inroads and basically had previously defeated Judas. And so against overwhelming odds, facing Bacchides, Judas valiantly falls in battle. And so the leadership of the revolt falls to Jonathan. So where we had said that Judas was a military leader, Jonathan is more of a shrewd politician. But having just been announced as the leader of the Maccabean revolt, he is immediately faced with a bunch of problems. The first is that he's in a bind because Bacchides had just defeated the great military leader Judas and is now imposing on Jerusalem. The second thing that he's got he has to contend with is the death of his brother John. John was deceived. He went to go ask for some folks to be there that they thought were their allies to store some cargo or something really menial, and they turn on him, they kill him, and then so he and his brother Simon revenge them by routing the perpetrators in the middle of a wedding feast. They're part of the wedding party, completely unarmed, and they just that is no longer a happy celebration whenever the Jews arrive. As for Bacchides, he loses that battle, and he has to kind of lay low for a couple of years of turmoil until eventually Alchemist dies. And when that happens, Bacchides is kind of tired of everything, and he goes back to Seleucia, and Jonathan kind of uses this opportunity to make a treaty with Bacchides. He says Bacchides is already kind of jaded with the region. He's really tired of all the infighting, and Jonathan says, just put me in charge and you never have to come back. And he agrees to it. He says, I'm not coming back, and he never does. So Jonathan has a period of peace, right? He begins to judge the people, as the text says. which would lead you to believe that they are once again independent. But again, it's kind of this quasi-independent state because they are not entirely independent. They still have the citadel, they still have the fortresses, they still owe taxes to Demetrius. So at this time, Alexander Ballas comes on the scene. So while we have a period of peace, it always seems to happen that something comes up. Alexander Ballas claims to be the son of Antiochus IV, and that he should be the rightful heir, not Demetrius I. And he starts, Jonathan basically starts a bidding war for his services between Demetrius and Alexander Ballas. And so they both start promising more and more things to him until eventually he throws in his lot with Alexander. And he chooses rightly. Alexander Ballas defeats Demetrius I, and part of the bargain is that Jonathan is made the high priest. So now Jonathan is not only the military leader and the political leader, he's also the religious leader of the Jewish nation. So Alexander Ballas has a lot of backing. One of his backers is Egypt. So the king of Egypt is a guy named Ptolemy, and he is willing to marry his daughter to Alexander Ballas, and Jonathan gets invited to the wedding. So whenever he arrives, he makes a good impression on all of the people there. He gets appointed to the high nobility of Alexander Ballas, and he also gets to make inroads with Ptolemy and kind of builds a relationship with Egypt there. So he's doing well with Alexander Ballas, and of course, whenever things start going well, something in the political world turns and just disrupts everything. So in this case, Demetrius II shows up. He's the son of Demetrius I, as you can see up there. He's 14 years old, and he arrives from Crete to challenge Alexander Ballas. And the first thing that he does is he picks a fight with Jonathan. He says, if I'm going to have a chance to defeat Alexander Ballas, first I got to get through these guys. And he baits them down to the coast to have this battle. Now, Jerusalem is a little ways away from the coast, and it's up in the mountains. And so it's advantageous for Demetrius II to have this battle down on the coast and out of the mountains because he's got some cavalry, and he would have the tactical advantage there. But it doesn't work out. Jonathan and together with his brother Simon are able to win the battle. And in doing so, they capture the town of Joppa, which is a really big deal because now they have a coastal city and they can start really utilizing that for trade, for fishing, for all sorts of useful things to expand their nation's influence and kind of get them on the map for other things as well. So in doing so, right, this is a plus for Alexander Ballas that his enemy just got defeated by Jonathan, and so he gets promoted to the highest title of nobility that Alexander has. And Jonathan, in turn, makes Simon the governor of the coastal area. Right, so now I had mentioned that Ptolemy has been backing Alexander Ballas. For some strange reason, that flips. We're not exactly certain why that flips, but he wants to no longer support Alexander Ballas, and he now wants to support Demetrius II. So he marches up the coast. Now, normally marching up the coast would mean going through the newly captured Judean cities. So Jonathan goes down there and meets him and walks with him through his territory. And so building that relationship and having that political shrewdness, he's able to avoid his towns getting sacked while Ptolemy makes his way up the coast. And indeed, when Ptolemy gets up there, he divorces his daughter from Alexander Ballas. He gives his daughter to Demetrius II, and of course Alexander Ballas cannot have this. This is really a slap in the face, so he goes to battle against Ptolemy, and the result of the battle is that basically they both die. So it's no longer Alexander Ballas or Ptolemy that's in charge. The only one left standing is Demetrius II. So he is now the new king. And in spite of the fact that Jonathan had been backing Alexander Ballas this whole time, he manages this transition very well. He manages to maintain his status as the highest nobility. He manages to maintain his status as the high priest and religious and military and political leader. And he even gets some extra land out of the deal. He winds up gaining Samaria. So, this just really speaks to how well the rulers thought of Jonathan. So he helps Demetrius II with a deal. Demetrius II says, hey, I've got some folks that are uprising in my city. They've seized my palace, and I need some help. And so Jonathan sends about 2,000 troops, and he says, here's the deal. I'll help you, but you got to get rid of this citadel. Like, it's time for me to kind of distance myself from y'all and become my own state. And at first, Demetrius II agrees. As soon as the troops come and help him, he reneges on the deal. And so he's lost himself an ally in Jonathan, is basically what happens. And so Antiochus VI arrives on the scene at this point. Now, Antiochus VI is certainly not acting on his own. He's acting on behalf of a guy named Trypho. Trypho has his own motivations and his own aspirations, and he found Antiochus VI, and is kind of basically using him. He's also very young. But with some, Demetrius II wasn't super popular, but Trypho was able to make people believe in him, and they are able to oust Demetrius II. And so, again, there's a change of power. This time it goes from Demetrius II to Antiochus VI, or Trypho as it may be. And again, same thing happens. Jonathan retains all of his power in the transition and even gains more land again. Predictably, as we all kind of saw coming, Trypho overthrows Antiochus VI, and then he goes after Jonathan, who he sees as being the biggest threat in the region. And he tricks Jonathan into entering a city, and as soon as Jonathan enters the city, they bar the gates, and they kill his whole entourage. So the next brother to step up is Simon. He is named the new leader. He's the last brother left, and he is able to immediately, the immediate action that he has to do is stop Trypho, and he's able to do that pretty well. He's been doing this for a while, and he's understanding the way that these things work. He's seen Judas operate, he's seen Jonathan operate, and he's seen how the Seleucids operate. So he's willing to blend all of those things together and make this kind of his moment to shine. So the first thing he does is he retrieves the remains of Jonathan, and he makes a big monument for him and all of the Hasmonean family. And he does everything right politically. He does everything right militarily. He overthrows the fortresses that have been in the region, and then and instead of those, he installs Jewish soldiers. And so he had already done this trick kind of when he was the governor of the coastal area, and now he's doing it throughout the whole region so that he can ensure that Jewish law prevails and that the Seleucids aren't able to make in their inroads anymore. And that's where we left off last time, is that Simon was able to conquer the citadel. And this was huge. This was emblematic of the independence of Judah. This is kind of the culmination of the revolt. We were finally able to get all trace of the Seleucid influence out of the region. And so we have a couple of chapters that are just devoted to saying great things about Simon. They have this great song that they sang and memorials that they had raised, and his being able to capture Joppa, being able to capture the citadel, and they basically turn him into a dictator. The text goes out of its way not to use the word king. He's not a king. He's not a monarch, but they call him an ethnarch. So he's the only person that's allowed to wear purple. And if you say anything against him, he's allowed to punish you. So, okay. not a king. Also things that we talked about, they were able to renew the treaties with Rome and Sparta. And Simon's son John was made a general, and he was stationed on the coast at a place called Gazara, which is basically taking up Simon's old post, right? So this guy is the guy who's going to be groomed to take over the throne or take over the leadership next. So where we left off is this guy named Antiochus Iv arises. You can see on the chart that he is another son of Demetrius I. He shows up, and he's not happy with Trypho having overthrown Antiochus VI, and he trapped Trypho in a town, and he got angry with Simon, and that's where we left off. So again, we only had one chapter left in the text, so I'll quickly summarize what happens. Antiochus VII and his general, his name is Cendebeus? Yes. Anyway, they split up, and the king is going to go after Trypho while the general is going to harass the Jews. And eventually, that's what happens, Antiochus VII will eventually catch up with Trypho and will kill him at Apamea. But meanwhile, Cendebeus camps against Judah. He makes a bunch of raids, and of course the closest stronghold is Gazra, so John Hyrcanus is the guy who is Simon's son. John Hyrcanus, son of Simon there. He's going to be the one who repels the invasion, the raids, and the author really appears to be building up John in the same manner as it had built up his father and his uncles and basically the whole family. And so he is, in the true kind of Judas way of doing things, leads his army across the stream into battle, and he returned to Judah in peace, and he has that same kind of verbiage that we have, that the cycle of the judges, basically. Now, Simon and his two sons, Judas and Mattathias, they get assassinated. This is kind of a weird one-off story, and it only takes place over like 5 or 6 verses. I would think that this would be more significant than that, but it's not in the text. But what winds up happening is his son-in-law tricks him and gets them drunk and kills both him and 2 of his sons, his son Judas and his son Mattathias. And so John Hyrcanus learns about the coup attempt, and he is able to evade the people that are after him. And so he's able to kill, the assumption is that he was able to kill those people who were sent to kill him. And that is the end of the Maccabees. That is where the book ends. Just right there. It just stops. It says basically that John Hyrcanus had a bunch of deeds that have been recorded in other books, and you are welcome to go look at the other books to learn about the things that he has done. So it kind of, the assumption is that First Maccabees was probably written somewhere along the time that John Hyrcanus dies. So what happens? What happened to them? Kind of the rest of the story, if you will, for some people that are older and remember Paul Harvey. John Hyrcanus leads the country for the next 30 years. He will also serve as the high priest and political figure, the same way that his father before him did. And the Seleucid Empire, over the next 60 years, are going to have 16 more rulers. So that's not a great track record. Many of them are going to be ruling simultaneously, and John Hyrcanus is going to exploit this, kind of in the same way that his fathers were able to. And he's going to be able to conquer a lot of things. They're going to make their own coins. They're going to build foreign relations. And this is kind of going to be viewed as the heyday, the high point of Judah's independence. And so we refer to this as the Hasmonean Dynasty. In fact, it goes on through the Hasmonean family rules for a while. but it doesn't take too very long. And John Hyrcanus dies in 104 BC. And what is generally considered the end of the Hasmonean Dynasty happens in 63 BC. So about 40 years after John Hyrcanus' death is about where the Hasmoneans stop ruling. And what happens is Pompey invades. So there's a civil war. I mean, the same things that plague the Seleucids are going to be the things that plague the Hasmoneans. So they're going to have this infighting about who is supposed to be the next person that's the leader of the nation. And so there's be this civil war between the sons of the Hasmoneans. So there's Hyrcanus II, and then there's Aristobulus II. Sorry, I don't know who these people are, but they're not. They wind up basically fighting a proxy war for the Romans. And like I said, Pompey comes in and he says, look, if you guys can't govern yourselves, you clearly need us to help you do that. And so they have no issues coming in and doing that. And of course, there's more political complications than that, but just suffice it to say that eventually Herod will become the governor in 37 BC. And this is the same Herod that is the one who tries to kill all the Jewish males whenever Jesus is born. So, I mean, he's ruthless, and he ends the dynasty, no problem. He kills all the Hasmoneans, all of their family. There's one princess left, and he marries her to make himself legitimate, and that's it. Like, the end. So, so if it wasn't already dead at 63 BC, it is certainly dead at 37 BC. So, of course, during the Hasmonean rule, we also have the rise of the Pharisees, who are, this political movement within the Jews to retain their culture in the same way that the Hasmoneans viewed or valued and were so inspired to do to lead the revolt. And it specifically turned to religious movement after Roman intervention, right? This idea of really what they wanted to do was to prevent the need for revolt, but they were trying to follow in the footsteps of the first Maccabees in doing all of the right things. I've mentioned a few times that the text demonstrates that we are trying to do the right thing. Judas does all of the right things. He prays in the right way, and he leads the people in the right way, and he says all of the right things, and therefore they are able to retain their independence. The problem is that, doing the right things is not, is too nearsighted, right? This is still God's story. It's not the story of this Hasmonean family, right? And ultimately, that's the point of the Maccabees. And as you go through the Old Testament and you read Esther, God is hardly mentioned, but clearly Esther is about God. When we read the first Maccabees, it may not be scripture, but it's clearly about God, and that all of history is God's story, right? And many times throughout this story, Judah could have been snuffed out from existence, right? But that was not God's plan. And his plans were for his king to rise up out of the root of Jesse and the house of David, and to show that the true kingdom of God and what it means, and he shows that to all of the world, right? And for Jesus to serve as a sacrifice so that we can all be gathered to God, and so that we can live an abundant life with God for all eternity. That is the point of the story. And the Maccabees are just one chapter in the build-up to that climax of the story, right? So thank you for attending. Thank you for staying engaged. I know that I've just been up here talking a whole lot, so I hope this has been beneficial. I would like to open it up to your input for a little bit. If this has been beneficial, or if there's any comments that you would like to make, I'm only going to be here another year, and then I'll go on to another congregation. Was this worthwhile? Should I do this again? Or is this, something that you would rather not your time would have been better spent doing something else, like talking about minor prophets or something more scripturally based. Or
I think you should try this again.
okay,
I found it very interesting.
we have one vote for.
Been interesting. We don't typically study the Inter-Testamental Period much, and how some of the things changed and what came about between the end of the Old Testament and the start of the New Testament.
It's kind of interesting that they didn't want to call him king, maybe. That's
Mm.
kind of like part of the thing with captivity. They came back and they didn't go into idolatry.
Mm.
Kind of learned their lesson on that.
Mm.
Maybe they also learned the lesson of, from back when they wanted to have a king. And God didn't want them to have a king, but he allowed them to have a king.
But they did, right? So it became the semantics, right? We didn't call him a king, but he was in name, right? And so you wind up with the whole question of why are we doing this, right? Which is what Jesus questioned the Pharisees at the very root of what they were doing. So, yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, though. Yeah, this is
Probably why they didn't want to call him a king.
true, true. Is somebody else going to say something over here?
I was gonna say, I think you did a wonderful job. I felt like it
Amen.
was way over my head. I don't know how you could get it to a third grade level, like what I would need. Because I know you're really just reading, like taking it out of the text. So I don't know how to simplify that, but.
Yeah, that was my next question, is if this is worthwhile, what I could improve for next time. So, I mean, I tried to give those handouts and the maps and the charts, but we need we need the puppet show. Yeah, there we go. Veggie Tales. I'll work on that.
I thought it was really interesting because, as Ralph said, we don't talk much about the intertestamental period and, the fact that there was 400 years there that they went without a prophet. And so they were stumbling their way through a lot of the time.
They were. No, I mean, they just had what was the last thing that was given to them, and they took it and run with it as best they knew how. But ultimately, it wasn't about them. It was about God. And so I think that's probably a lesson for a lot of us. Any other final closing comments?
The Catholic Bible includes the Inter-Testamental books.
It does. It includes the Apocrypha. So you can get them two ways. You can either get them Old Testament, Apocrypha, New Testament, or you can get it Old Testament with Apocrypha, where the Apocrypha is just meshed in, and then the New Testament. So it's merged. And that's, I have one up here if you'd like to take a look at it. It's super interesting.
What is the position, or do you know about the Greek Orthodox Church about Apocrypha?
So they, each faith tradition kind of holds its own. So I'm pretty sure the Greek Orthodox Church does recognize the Apocrypha as scriptural, but not the same books that the Catholic Church does. I think they have an expanded library beyond what the Catholics do. I think there's a couple of books that they refer to as scriptural that the Catholics do not. Pretty sure. I could be wrong. Am I wrong, Dennis? Yeah, there's more. All right, well, thank you so much for being with us, and enjoy your evening.
Wednesday night Zoom class, and so this is the first time I've been here for this, but I thought it was really good.